This was supposed to be the topic of today's video. It's not the fastest Minecraft CPU, actually it's not even really a CPU because it's just a prototype I've been working on. As such, to explain why any of this even matters, we have to go back in time a few years. Back in 2022, like any normally socially adjusted person, I decided that I was going to build Minecraft's fastest CPU. Now, my first 3 attempts were somewhat by design awful, and this was mostly just because instead of trying to actually do my best, I was prioritizing beating the competition. That all changed with Project Ultima, a non-pipeline 2.5 Hz prototype which I still consider to be the limit of conventional redstone. Keyword being conventional. Now, piston-based zero-tick or instant CPUs have existed for longer than I've been on the redstone scene, but they've always been notoriously ginormous and clock speed limited. As such, they often weren't revered as the best, given that their computational density is god-awful. However, this isn't the only way you can make zero-tick redstone. A little-known feature in Minecraft is something called comparator priming, which allows for comparator-based zero-tick updates. Now, although comparator priming was generally much smaller, it had 2 key drawbacks. First of all, as a much newer technology, it was rather poorly understood, which led to the popularization of rather large and/or severely clock-limited styles. Secondly, it's not strictly MCHPRS compatible, or at least it wasn't back then. I'm kind of a hermit, so who knows. But anyways, for the uninitiated, that is the software that allows redstoners to run simulations at like tens of thousands of times the speed at which they normally run, which meant that the real-world performance of comparator priming was severely limited. But like any teenager who just gotten his driver's license, I knew that nobody cared about real-world performance or arbitrary limits. Give us that speed, so off to comparator priming land I went. Now, to achieve comparator priming's maximum clock speed of 10 Hz, you need to give it a set of alternating pulses, which are called the early and late pulses. Now, all the designs I'd seen up to this point had a mechanism to generate both of these pulses for every bit layer, but I realized, what if bit layers could share pulses? In Minecraft, powering a block actually powers any redstone dust around it, so if I could make each successive layer the late pulse of the previous layer, I could get away with only half the pulse generating components, which would both save on space and complexity. Since Minecraft prioritizes horizontal updates over vertical ones, a design as simple as this could be used for vertical architectures, variations of which allowed me to make record-breaking designs, such as the 8x8 2+ bit per layer adder which was featured in the prototype at the start of the video. As a side note, since I haven't seen anyone else perform comparative priming like this, I'm going to refer to this as Revan priming, because like all high schoolers, I knew that the only true joy of being a scientist was the knowledge that one day, your stupidly esoteric name would make people fail pop quizzes. Now, you might be thinking that this is the part in the story where I use this knowledge to actually build a computer, in which case you would be horribly wrong. For some mental and medical reasons, I'd actually been slowing down since the start of my first computer, which actually had something to do with my inspiration for starting this in the first place. While it was manageable at first, by the time I'd gotten a good grasp on comparative priming, I was already having a very hard time doing redstone, especially when it was projects that I felt invested in. For a time, this would lead to me devoting more energy to shorter in-a-day projects, but so too did the underlying design of these side projects become increasingly discoherent as time went on. Eventually, I stopped working on the computer altogether, and I even had to drop out of college. Now, during this time, I was a mess. Hell, I still am. But for some reason, I felt like my mind had begun to return. So, even though I was nauseous and tired and sometimes completely blind, I started to build. And that's what this video was supposed to be about, me finally putting together the components which I'd had sitting around for years. The fastest adder, the highest density non-container based memory design, and even a technique that increased the density and writability of container-based memory. All unreleased, all world records. But that's not how it went. You see, the only thing that holds comparator priming back, and zero-tick in general, is the clock speed. If there was some way to circumvent or increase this limit, it'd make zero-tick technology unbeatable. Now, I tried my best to push comparator priming to its limit, but since comparators themselves start to break down at about 10 Hz, and since I hadn't discovered any true alternatives, there wasn't anything else I could do, or so I thought. To create this computer, I decided to upgrade my Minecraft version to 1.21.4, which, in exchange for a slight performance hit, offered new features. Now, I didn't realize it at the time, but this seemingly insignificant change directly prevented me from discovering a possible alternative to comparator priming. As a random video I saw a few days back revealed, in specific older versions of the game, a patched feature allows you to entirely circumvent the clock speed limit of zero-tick tech. This, combined with a seemingly obvious way to conditionally generate asynchronous pulses, meant the dawn of infinite Hertz tech. Which is terrible! Oh, but Revan, aren't faster computers a good thing? No. No, they're not. Do you want to know why? This is a 64-bit ALU on a comparative priming system. An ALU, by the way, is just the part of a CPU that actually does the computation. And this is a 64-bit ALU on a... God, I don't even know what to call this thing. Let's just call it multi-execution per tick, or MET. I don't know. If there's another name out there, tell me. Anyways, though, this is a 64-bit ALU for MET. Oh, but Revan, that's just something wrong. Welcome to Infinite Hertz. Now, I don't think the people who discovered this and have used the tech thus far actually understand what infinite hertz means, so let me explain how something this absurd functions. An ALU structure isn't something implicit to electricity or redstone. It's simply an arbitrary speed optimization, which is designed to allow a system to spend as much of a clock cycle as it can, progressing towards its goal. But in an infinite hertz system, there's literally no reason to optimize anything for speed. So for a second here, let's think about how we would optimize for, per se, space. For starters, instead of having, per se, a 64-bit ALU, let's instead have a 1-bit ALU and use it 64 times. Furthermore, an ALU is really just a collection of logic gates, so let's just replace everything with like a XOR and an AND gate. But logic gates are just combinations of transistors, so actually let's just get rid of everything and use a single transistor, and bam, infinite hertz ALU. Now, literally using one transistor, or whatever a better fundamental metric for Minecraft would be unrealistic. We'd need to use something a little bit more high level, since the additional hardware required to run said system would likely be larger than just using a more complex ALU. As such, the result would probably range between either using one of these or using two of these, which just serves as an adder and a fairly comprehensive logic unit. Optimizing for infinity also means that the memory hierarchy becomes almost entirely irrelevant, as once again, for about 99% of the memory, optimizing for anything except for size is now totally worthless. But even size-optimized memory is really quite large for this medium. Here's a crummy design I threw together in a few hours for scale. As a side note, I think this design might actually be a size world record. Back to the point though, given how large these memory cells are, to run anything, especially if you want to accommodate the hypothetical throughput of infinity, you need a lot of them, like as many as your computer can handle. So that's the final form of redstone computation. Few logic gates and some control logic, strapped to a uniform memory array, which is delineated by the limits of your simulation distance or your RAM. Oh, but Revan, what about real-world performance? Now, while something like Ultima isn't the fastest thing out there, it is surprisingly update efficient when compared to zero-tick tech. Additionally, remember how I mentioned at the beginning of this video that MCHPRS makes builds run at like 10,000 times the speed? Well, Ultima is MCHPRS compatible, which means that it will run at a target clock speed of 100 kilohertz, which isn't something that either of the alternatives could hope to hold a candle to. In summary, I said that infinite hertz was a bad thing because it signifies the end of an era. The time when intelligent design prevailed over arbitrary limits and how many RGB lights your computer has is no more. So, I'm done chasing the limit. I mean, hell, there's redstone computers out there right now that I can't even load without crashing, so I'm not going to convince myself there's a war I could win, much less that it's one that can't even be won. This probably won't be my last upload or anything, and certainly if this video gets any traction, or if you guys are curious about any of the stuff I mentioned, or I don't know, if I feel like it, I'll upload more. But the time I spent waiting for the perfect computer, the perfect video, and the perfect story, that time has ended now. Also, I've had a really bad experience with the redstone community as a whole, so much so that like 90% of anything positive that I've said about like being a redstoner or like being a part of the community or whatever that I've said over the past like half decade is probably meant sarcastically. As such, henceforth I'll probably be doing more VTubing stuff and whatnot since I found the reception of that to be far more fulfilling. I could also listen to YouTube analytics and exclusively create Boy Love ASMR videos henceforth, but that would indicate that I actually care about the quality of my uploads, which I mean, come on, that's obviously not true. Anyways, the moral of the story is this. If you want the fastest CPU in terms of real-world performance, Ultima is the best. If you want the fastest CPU with a wide version compatibility, Pinnacle is the way to go. And of course, if you want the fastest possible computer, you're probably going to want to follow the theory I mentioned. In other words, suck it nerds, transition to 2010 style outro!